Bro, honestly, this might be one of the most egregious instances of like uncontrollable horniness that I've ever seen in a horror film. Like, can you imagine showing up to your crush's house and their little sister meets you in the living room and she asks you if you want to hear something cool and you're like, yeah, sounds great. Why not? She then proceeds to look you dead in your eyes, making uncomfortable, unflinching eye contact, and asks you if you know what it feels like to be strangled to death. And then she proceeds to explain it in vivid, graphic detail, every single sensation you would experience during this ordeal. When she's done, she gives you the creepiest smile imaginable that a 10-year-old could possibly give you. And understandably, you're freaked out, so you leave. But then your dumbass comes back the very next day. The next day, son. And guess what? You get fucking murked. What'd you expect, bro? I'm Brandon O. This is Terrorific, and we're chopping up Ouija, Origin of Evil. The film was released back in 2016, and it was directed and co-written by Mike Flanagan, who, if you don't know, is one of the most popular names in horror right now. And I'm not doing like internet deep dives into articles that other people have written. I'm trying to give you my own interpretation with a fresh lens. And so from my perspective, the themes most prevalent in the film are about how we navigate varying family dynamics, and how the titular quote-unquote evil that's originating is coming from broken homes, manifesting itself through negative childhood experiences and trauma that extend into adulthood. The plot centers around a woman named Alice who runs a fake seance business with her two daughters, the eldest being Lina and the youngest being Doris. Now, during one of these fake seances, one of the customers calls the business a scam, and Alice defends it by saying that they help people heal and find closure through a little quote-unquote showmanship. Now, it's important to note that Alice is a single mother because her husband, the girl's father, has died. He was killed by a drunk driver. So her pointing out, or her trying to defend her, what is a scam, by saying it's just showmanship, this is kind of our first introduction to the delusional attitude that Alice demonstrates throughout most of the movie. And it all stems from her inability to properly cope with grief. There's a scene early on in the movie where Alice and Doris are in her room. She's tucking her in, and Doris comments on how Alice used to pray every night with her and her father, but has since stopped praying ever since he died. And she's seen at such a young age how grief can make us cynical people. And she doesn't have a counterexample to learn anything different from. Alice is either unaware or doesn't care about the example that she's setting for her daughter. She's too busy living in her own delusional world. What struck me is just how isolated everyone in the family appears to be from one another. They all went through this shared trauma, this same tragic event of losing someone so important to them. And rather than have that be the inciting factor to bring them together, it drives them apart. Doris is being bullied at school and no one has any idea. She's desperate for connection, which ends up leaving her the most susceptible to the evil spirits in the home. Lina is able to sneak out at night to go to her friend's house where they party with a Ouija board and drink some of the parents' booze. She doesn't know how to process her father's death either, and she's getting zero help in that department from her mother because her mother doesn't know how to process it herself. And it doesn't help that Alice is buried under debt. She comes home one day to see a foreclosure notice on the house, and she can't find time to process and heal because she's busy trying to keep food on the table. But this isolation is further exemplified when Alice decides to buy a Ouija board to include in her seance act. The game explicitly says that its number one rule is to never play alone. Yet as soon as she opens the game, Alice immediately plays alone. And later on, Doris follows suit. Now, if we contrast that with the scene of Lina at the house party with her friends and they're playing the game, we can interpret that as meaning that Lina feels more connected to them, like they are more her family than her actual family is at this moment in time. And they're presented a chance to rectify that, and they squander it. Now, while her mother may be a fraud, Doris is legit. She has an actual connection to the spirit world. There's a scene where Doris uses the Ouija board to communicate with the spirits, and she's able to find a bag full of money that's stashed in the walls down in the basement. Now, this money could be, perhaps should be, the avenue through which Alice, and by extension Lina and Doris, can truly begin the healing process, since the immediate threat of homelessness has now been removed. But it ends up being more of a gilded cage, as it leads Alice to fully lean into Doris's abilities and frankly begin to exploit her. She brings her on as her assistant to her seances, so now they're no longer fraudulent, they're real. And this happens frequently enough that Doris ends up missing multiple days of school so that the school's principal, Father Tom, has to talk with Lina about, where the fuck's your sister? Throughout all this, Alice is still neglecting the root of the issue, that she has not sat down to truly deal with the grief, trauma, and tragedy that has befallen her and her daughters. Which brings us to the point where Doris gets full-on possessed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Doris is more susceptible to possession because she's so desperate for that connection, that bond. She misses her dad so much that she just wants to see him again, talk to him again, and that's the reason why she's on this Ouija board damn near every night. Well, she made contact with something, and that something gets revealed in a very effective jump scare. I mean, I knew it was coming this time, but the first time that I watched it, I was like, oh shit, like it got me. And we get the shot of this dark spirit, looks evil as fuck, and it just shoves its whole damn arm down Doris's throat and like crawls into her and takes her over. My interpretation of this scene was that it is a literal representation of a figurative thing that occurs. And that thing is how people in our lives, I think usually beginning with our parents, can oftentimes force their own beliefs, biases, prejudices, etc. down the throats of us, their children. And that just serves to perpetuate these various negative cycles, these cycles of hate, misogyny, racism, whatever it may be. Like, I am willing to bet an infinite amount of money that there has never been a newborn in human history that has come out of the womb thinking to themselves, wow, sure is cold out here. And by the way, I hate black people. Or, hey mom, thanks for the titty milk. Now get your ass back to the kitchen. No, these ideologies are taught and therefore they are learned. And Doris is just so desperate to be taught how to navigate through this grief that she's been experiencing. And no one's stepping up to the plate. And so when this dark entity comes about, he sees his chance and he takes it. But the ironic thing is, Alice is also desperate for connection. She's also looking for someone to teach her how to navigate her own childhood issues. There's a scene in the film where she mentions that her mother was a legitimate fortune teller as well. She had actual abilities. But Alice herself did not inherit the gift. It skips a generation. And because of that, she felt like she couldn't fully connect with her mother. And as an adult, she was so desperate to still have that connection, still crave that connection so badly that she literally started an entire business as a cheap imitation of her mother's abilities. And now, as soon as Doris demonstrates that she has inherited that same gift, Alice immediately goes all in. She's trying to finally connect with her mother through her daughter. But in the process of trying to reclaim her own childhood, try to navigate her own issues, she's sabotaging her daughter's childhood as well in the process. But I think another thing that this possession scene is symbolic of is the constant threat of external forces that can negatively influence our children. And if the parent is not present, if the parent does not have that bond with the child, then when these negative ideologies start to take hold, they're not able to see it quickly enough. And by the time they recognize it, it's too late. And now that child has become foundationally guided by this negative external force. And Alice is definitely slacking in the presence department. Around the time that Doris gets possessed, Lina has an intense nightmare where her lips fuse together and her mouth disappears. Now, later on, we come to contextualize this within the motivations of the evil spirits. But when I first saw it, my thought went to The Matrix and the scene where Neo is being interrogated by the agents and they alter the code to have his mouth fuse together and disappear as well. With the message being that taking away someone's literal or figurative voice can leave them powerless. And Lina has been left powerless because her pleas for help, her pleas to her mother to try to, get back on track and begin this healing process have been falling on deaf ears. Her mother has stuck her head in the sand and is pretending that everything is okay while she lives and prances about in this dream world. Once again, a la The Matrix. But as the audience, we of course know that everything is definitely not okay. Now the film brings us to a scene where Doris is at school and her bully is back on his bullshit. He pulls out his slingshot to shoot a rock at Doris, and Doris is clearly off. She's just like standing still, statuesque like in the middle of the fucking playground, not talking to anybody, not looking at anybody, not looking at the bully. But as soon as he aims his slingshot at her, she turns and just stares at him. Stares creepily as fuck. And then the bully's hands start to slowly turn the slingshot towards his own face. And he's freaking out because he knows it isn't him. And so it's like, hey, yo, now Doris has telekinesis as well. And nobody is seeing what's going on. And the bully isn't seeing much either because that shit probably put his eye out. But later that evening at the family's house, Doris essentially is in a catatonic state. And Alice doesn't even notice. In fact, she's too busy getting ready for her date with the school's principal, who is a Catholic priest, Father Tom. So let's talk about that for a second. Alice is feeling so alone, so lonely without her husband, that she's willing to leave her youngest child on a day where that child witnessed a kid probably get his eye or eyes shot out. And she's going on a date with a dude who's already married to God. So while she apparently misses a man's company, she still is not really ready to move on because she hasn't processed her husband's death. So she's going for a guy that she knows she likely won't be able to get anyway. And Father Tom is the same way. We come to find out that prior to becoming a priest, he was married and he lost his wife to an illness or something, I think it was. And so he took the cloth rather than risk losing his love again, which continues this theme of people's inability or fear of dealing with past traumas and being able to move on and heal from it. But there was one character who was always trying to move forward, and that's Lina's love interest, Mikey. With Alice out on her date with Father Tom, Lina invites Mikey over to the crib, tells Doris, don't say a word, or I'll cut up your dolls or some shit, which is that's hella rude. But anyway, as Mikey's ready to leave, that's when Doris catches him and just goes insane. I'm going to read you the quote verbatim, okay? Here's the exchange, pulled straight from IMDb. Doris, You want to hear something cool? Mikey. Sure. Doris. Do you know what it feels like to be strangled to death? First, you feel the pressure in your throat. Your eyes water and you start to taste something very, very sour in your mouth. Then it's like someone lights a match right in the middle of your chest and that fire grows. It fills your lungs and your throat and all the way behind your eyes. And finally, that fire turns to ice. Like pins and needles of ice are sticking into your fingers, your toes, your arms. You see stars, then darkness. And the last thing you feel is cold. End quote. And then she gives him the creepy ass smile. So I don't know about you, but if that were me, if I'm Mikey, the first thing I'm saying is, okay, what the fuck? And then the next thing I'm doing is going upstairs and immediately snitching. I'm telling Lina every word that just came out of her little sister's mouth. And then also, I'm breaking up with Lina because there is no way in hell I would ever return to this house after this creepy ass 10-year-old kid just gave me this detailed breakdown on strangulation. First of all, how does she even know all this shit? How does she know what the sensations and the experience is like? Where is she getting her information from? The internet doesn't even exist yet somehow she knows all this shit. Bro, there is nothing at all. I don't care how bad he thinks Lina is. It is not worth it, son. You got to get the fuck up out of there. But no. Mikey goes home, goes to sleep. Probably didn't sleep very well, but wakes up the next day. It's like, you know what? Nah, that was all right. Let me pull back up. And he goes back over to the house. And it gets even worse. Doris tells him about the cash that they found in the walls down in the basement, and she leads Mikey down there, trying to find some more. And this fucking dumbass reaches his arm into this goddamn hole in the wall, this dark ass hole in this dark ass, dank ass basement with this creepy ass kid behind him. She's doing all kinds of contorted, possessed shit. But Mikey has his eyes on the prize. You impress the family, you get to smash. 1 + 1, that's 2, quick math. And he gets possessed himself. R.I.P. Mikey. I hope chasing the cheeks was worth it. Do they have cheeks in the afterlife? Probably not for you, buddy. But you know what they say, opposites attract. And while Mikey was clearly dumb as fuck, Lina has some common sense. And common sense is such an undervalued, underappreciated trait in both horror films and in real life. Lina tells Alice that this ghost shit is changing Doris. She's clearly not communicating with her dad because if she was, why would he change her? A very logical question to ask, very reasonable to assume that he would not change her, and therefore one could deduce that since she has been changed, they are not communicating with dad. But nope, Alice does not seem to share that same common sense. But she does start to kind of have those wheels turn in her head that say, you know what, maybe something is a little off here. But she's slow on the take. And this brings us back to Lina's nightmare with having her mouth disappear. She is trying to clearly explain to Alice that shit is awry around the crib, and Alice just does not want to hear it. All parents think they know best, but it's the good parents that think they know best until they don't. And they are open and willing to take guidance and advice from their children. But Alice herself never learned how to do that because she was so alienated from her own mother due to not having that shared connection of this psychic gift. Apparently they couldn't bond over other shit. You know, they couldn't just like go out on walks together or go, shopping or some shit. And Lina just kind of gives up. She's resigned herself to the fact that her mother is not going to listen to what she has to say. And so when Lina comes across Doris sitting on the floor of her room, scribbling on some paper, Doris like literally isn't even looking at what she's writing. And she picks up this paper and finds out that everything has been written in Polish. But Lina doesn't bring it to her mother. She takes it to Father Tom at school, and he has a nun on staff translate the text. And it turns out that this is like a journal from the spirit that has taken over Doris. And it's a Polish Holocaust survivor named Marcus, who was subjected to experiments by a Nazi doctor obsessed with the occult, who has been nicknamed the Devil's Doctor. And man's family did not survive the experiments. But he gets rescued by the Allies and ends up fleeing to America, where he eventually winds up in a mental hospital. And while he's there, he recognizes one of the doctors as being the Devil's Doctor, who then takes Marcus to his home to continue his experiments in a secret room in the basement along with other victims. And of course, this house is the same house that our protagonist family now occupies, which explains all the freaky ghost shit. But the Devil's Doctor, he would cut out the tongues of his victims, also sever their vocal cords and seal their mouths so they couldn't be heard, even while he had company that he was entertaining upstairs. Yikes. So now we have the context behind Lina's nightmare, as well as the context behind the literal origin of evil, these spirits. But how does that relate to the symbolic origin of evil as we watch this family slowly disintegrate from the inside out? Marcus serves as an extreme example of what can happen when one is beholden to the traumas of their past. Now, don't get me wrong, bro never had a shot. I mean, he was fucked out the gate. But at a generalized level, Marcus experienced this horrific event or events, didn't have a support system in place to help him cope with it and move through it. And as a result, it festered and he descended into this dark place. The family experienced this shared tragic event and through choices of their own, didn't have the support system in place to properly deal with it and move through it. And they also began to descend into this dark place. And as we move through the third act of the film, common sense arrives in the form of Father Tom to finally provide some backup for Lina. He's like, hey, yo, Doris wrote all this crazy shit in Polish. It's some dark shit. I think we need an exorcism. Way to go, Father Tom. Way to be aware of the situation. But possessed Doris strangles good old Mikey to death, throws his noosed body down below for everyone to see. And Lina, understandably, is freaking the fuck out. And Alice is right there. Rather than try to comfort her in this moment of total shock and borderline devastation, she's like, we have to find your sister. I understand, wanting to stay on task and shit. But bro, she didn't even say oh shit, I'm sorry you witnessed that. Or, oh man, I know you're struggling right now, but we have to find your sister. She just yo, she did not give one fuck about Mikey. And then she tries to tell Lina to wait outside. And Lina's like, no, quote unquote, splitting up sounds like the stupidest idea in the world. Boy, just cooked her mom. Imagine being in this life or death situation with your mother and you guys are just so disconnected that you can't even agree on a simple plan of action. And you can't even disagree without calling her stupid, even if it's indirect. Lina has already internalized that her mother just won't be there for her. She's on her own. And so with that in mind, it's no longer much of a surprise how things turned out the way that they did. When they get to the final basement confrontation with Doris and her possessed posse, it ends up being Lina who overpowers Doris and tries to straddle her to sew her mouth shut. She finds some dirty ass needle and random thread stashed in the basement. Taking away the spirit's voice will take away their power in death as it did in life. But while I'm watching this, I'm like, okay, here Lina is sitting on Doris, sewing her mouth shut. What happened to all that super powered telekinetic strength that she demonstrated earlier where she had old dude blow his eye out. Now, all of a sudden, she's just chilling. But during this whole kerfuffle, Doris ends up getting killed, and Lina ends up possessed, and she stabs Alice in the gut, and Alice slowly dies. But before she dies, she says to Lina, "It's not your fault." And she's right. But what she could have said is, "It's not your fault. It's mine," because all of this shit happened because Alice did not have the wherewithal to be an adult and be present with her children. The very first rule of the Ouija game was to never play alone. The very last rule of the game was to always say goodbye. That's basically telling you right then and there that the only way to deal with your trauma is to do it together, and that eventually you cannot hold on to the past. You have to let it go. You have to say goodbye. And Alice never attempted to do that. She never gave her children a chance to do that. And that was the origin of the evil that ultimately led Lina to be the sole survivor of her family and be committed to a mental hospital. God damn. So that's my interpretation of Ouija Origin of Evil. I could be wildly off base. I don't know. And if you think I am, let me know and we can have a discussion about it. Or if you think maybe I was on point, let me know that as well, because who doesn't like affirmation? Thank you for listening. If you're feeling the vibe of the show, be sure to tap in with me on Instagram. Follow and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform of choice. Subscribe over at the YouTube channel as well. All handles are at Terrorific Podcast. I'm also on Threads now too, so feel free to follow on that as well. Every once in a while, I'll pose a question to the general horror community and just kind of try to engage in discussion and dialogue, because that's what it's all about. So I'm out of here. Catch you next time. But remember, always keep it spooky.